has just finished his breakfast, so I think he just checked his teeth before to make sure there's
I was making sure
no cereal left in there.
Or nuts.
That's great. Well, good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are around Australia. I know we've got probably about 4 states represented here. So welcome and thank you for joining us today for the session on shaping a new perspective on 2020. And we are very privileged to have James Bryant from Lead Different join us today. James has worked with many people, mainly here and in America. He's worked alongside Rick Warren and Erwin McManus for those of you who might know those church leaders in America. And James is going to share with us today about how we can reframe our perspective of 2020 to be able to take control and launch into next year with more determination. I've been really blessed to have met James last year when I did his program called Ignite. It was a 8-week little program that I did, and he gave me this little booklet, but it is completely full of lots of notes that I put down there at the time. And I revisit this every few months when I just need to sort of reconsolidate where I'm at. And it was really impacting for me and for my life at that point. It got me to the position where I decided that I needed to put my job that I was doing to rest and focus on the next stage that God had for me. So I highly trust and recommend James and everything he has for us today. I'm just going to very quickly pray and then we'll get started. So Father in heaven, thank you that you are God and you are good. You love us, you know us, and you have control ultimately. Even when life looks messy, when life is hard, you are our rock and our foundation. I just pray that this time will be fruitful. I pray that you'll speak boldly through James and that we'll have hearts and ears to listen and minds that will focus on what you want us to hear today. And I thank you for each person on this call, and I pray that you will bless them and every organisation and church they represent. Amen. So thank you for joining us. And James, you've got the floor, mate. Sorry, just before I do, can I just ask that you mute yourselves unless you have a question to ask. A couple of other things, just down the bottom is the mute button. And is there anything else? So James will speak for probably about 50 minutes or so, and then there'll be questions afterwards, which may flow over the hour. You can leave if you need to, but he's happy to take a lot of questions afterwards. So thank you.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to be here. 6 years ago, I started my company, Lead Different. And the whole goal of it was to work with churches. But for whatever reason, I found myself actually called to actually work with outside in the corporate world. And it's actually where I found a really fun, sweet spot where I used to be a pastor in a church setting, and now I'm a pastor to people outside of the church, which is even more fun because it's how God wired me to engage with them. I was like, oh, this is actually what I was called for. Yay. And so it's been really fun to discover that accidentally, where I work with leaders, everyone from someone like Evan, who's started his own company, all the way up to executives in some of the, Telstra and RAC and Toyota and where else? Anyway, all those big companies, but it's been a lot of fun. So, but I'm really excited that Evan put this opportunity to work with mainly faith-based organizations because this is still where my heart's at. But I don't get a lot of these opportunities these days. And so when Evan asked me, I said, yes. And he's like, so what do we figure out to charge? I'm like, let's make it free. Let's get everyone there. And so I just was really keen to invest in what you guys are doing and the ministries that you have. So quick question for you, and you can just do it by show of hands, whatever. Who found their anxiety levels greater in 2020 than 2019? Anyone find? Yeah, anxiety went up. Yeah. Who found that a whole set of challenges were completely different to 2019? Yeah. Who found their relationships looked completely different? Yeah. So typically, most people are answering that I'm working with around the globe are answering yes to this question, which is really unique because it's been this global shared experience, except for those of us in Perth and New Zealand. Now, I say this, I want to acknowledge, okay, I am from Perth. Yes, our lockdown lasted for about 20 minutes, but in saying that, we still had impacts over here. So literally in a 48-hour period, my company, we lost every single contract that was current and future, wiped, books clean, no work, no income. I remember calling up I had a client who I was working with, and she's in a big marketing company, and she was saying, "Oh, marketing's always the first thing to get cut from companies' budgets." I said, "Oh, is it now? How long did it take you to lose all your contracts?" She said, 4 days. I said, 2 days. Development and leadership training. That's what gets wiped first. And it's true. And so that was our experience. But it was interesting when we locked down and we lost all this stuff. I remember I called up my wife and I was like, so I don't know what we're going to do because you're a relief teacher and schools were getting shut down. So as far as we knew, she had no longer had any work. I just lost all our income and we were talking on the phone. And I remember just both of us bursting out laughing and going, and we had this idea. We said, you know what? We're undefeated so far. Why is this going to beat us? And so we came with this mantra. So for a couple of weeks, we just kept repeating to each other every time we got stressed, every time we got trying to figure out what we're going to do. Because remember, the government subsidies, the JobKeeper, none of that had been announced or anything, and we didn't know what we were doing. We kept just repeating to each other, undefeated so far, undefeated so far. Just and I say undefeated so far, but we included like stuff like undefeated with God at our side, stuff like that. But in my corporates, when I deliver this to corporates, I just say undefeated so far. And so, but that was our mantra. But then a few weeks in, one of the things I realized is that 2020 was throwing these extraordinary opportunities at us. To learn, to grow, to face things that normally we would never willingly face. Hey, pastor your church without seeing anyone for 6 months. Go ahead, have fun. Like if you were given the opportunity to do that, or to keep pastoring and meeting with them, or fundraising, or I know there's some not-for-profits fundraising in here. To do it face to face or to do it online, how many people here would have said, "Oh, I'd love to try this online thing"? No one's willingly signing up for that, especially when you love people and you get energized people, you want to be around people. And so this digital thing's fun, but it's not the same as feeling their energy when you're in the same room. If you guys can remember what that's like. And so that's when we realized that there was a whole bunch of unique opportunities that were being handed to us. My wife and I changed it from undefeated so far to let's not waste it. And what we kept saying to each other when things got hard, when things felt uncomfortable, when things were outside of what we wanted and what we felt like, we just kept saying to each other, you know what, let's not waste it. Let's not waste it. Because what we realized is that there were so many unique opportunities that were just smacking us in the face. And the problem is these opportunities were unique and they are opportunities, but when they're hitting you in the face, they hurt. And so instinctively, what we're going to do is we're going to duck, because if someone throws a punch at you, the instinctive response is to duck. And so most people are ducking and missing these opportunities. And we wanted to remind each other, let's not miss these opportunities. And so we began repeating that to each other, let's not waste this. But I know for a lot of us, and as I look around and as I work with clients, as I see people on social media and stuff, it seems like that's not where most people are at. I feel like people think that as soon as the calendar ticks over to 2021, everything magical is going to happen and it's going to be amazing and we're going to never think or talk about 2020 again. And I don't know, and I can see people nodding. And so you guys are all aware that's not going to happen. Because what 2020 did, and this is one of the things that I realized, is that 2020 didn't necessarily create any new problems. It just exacerbated problems that were already there. Have death and sickness been with us for ever since the fall? Yeah, they have. Most of us just faced them in a different way. Now, you might have grown up in a different society, but if you grew up in Australia, we were faced with death and sickness in a way, very real way, that we'd never faced before. Has isolation been a problem in our society and communities for forever? Yeah. But now we're faced with it in a new way. 2020 didn't bring anything new to the table. How it happened to us was different, but what was happening to us wasn't different. And so with understanding that and knowing that, okay, these problems have been here before and they're going to be here after, what can we learn from this moment that takes us into the future? And one of the things, and I guess probably the undergirding real strong part of that is, if we don't relate to 2020 in a healthy way, we're not going to learn the lessons. If we don't learn how to appreciate 2020 and everything that's brought to us, then it's going to these lessons. Because one of the things I firmly believe is that God keeps giving us the same lesson till we learn it, right? It's his loving way of helping us grow. Doesn't feel loving at times, doesn't feel gentle, and it doesn't have to be gentle, but that's what God does for us. And so understanding that that's what's happening here is that these lessons, if we don't learn them in 2020, they're going to come up again, whether it's next year or the year after. It's coming, because that's how God works. You read basically the Old Testament is that cycle. Right? If God's people needing to learn a lesson that they're refusing to learn. And so with this understanding, how do we build a relationship with 2020 that's healthy? That's where my company comes in. See, when our company is called Lead Different, what we're talking about there is that most leadership development is centered around, how do you get other people to follow you, right? How do you get people to follow you? That's what leadership development is. One of the things that we discovered at Lead Different is that this method of leadership development is largely a waste of time. And we know this because we live in a golden age of leadership development. There's stuff everywhere, right? If you Google leadership development, you're going to get millions of options in all these courses. And yet, at the same time, surveys show that 70% of the workforce is disengaged. Not only that, but a recent survey in the UK showed that 15% of workers have fantasized about killing their boss. So in every organization, 1 in 10 people has fantasized about killing their boss. I don't know if you have 10 staff where you're at, but start trying to figure out who it might be. But that's where we're at with leadership development. And the reason is that most organizations are still defined by what we call chaos and inertia. And the reason most organizations are defined by chaos and inertia is because most individuals' lives are defined by chaos and inertia. And so our focus on leadership development is not on how do you get people to follow you, but how do you become someone worth following? How do you become someone worth following? And so what we mean by that is what we're talking about there, and the way the term we use for that is self-leadership. How do you lead yourself so well that people want to follow you? And a major foundational part of this is, how do we relate to events and how do we relate to others and ourselves? So how do we relate to 2020? So people who are leading themselves well, the people who we want to follow, are people who already have a healthy relationship with 2020. Now, I know that a bunch of you in here have probably already got a pretty good relationship with 2020. But one of the things is, it's very hard to replicate until you have language to describe the process, right? And so you can't help others get there until you have the language. So some of you on here who are already leading yourselves really well, you might go through this whole training hour that we have together, and you might not learn anything necessarily new, but it might just give you new language to talk about what you have naturally been doing intuitively. And so that might be what you get out of this. So anyway, that's kind of the setup for all this. And so we're going to talk about a few concepts from our art of self-leadership. So I want to talk to you now. Anyone in here have a sibling, or anyone here have siblings? Show of hands for siblings. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I got a younger sister and older brother. My wife is from America, and so this weekend we did a Thanksgiving thing, just because it's probably the greatest American tradition, because It's not about presents. It's not about money. It's just about getting together and being thankful and family. So my wife and I decided that's part of her American culture we really want to give to our kids and to our extended family over here. So we did Thanksgiving. And what's interesting is anytime family gets together and we start talking about memories and stuff from the past, it's really fun to figure out whether we actually did grow up in the same household. Because my brother and sister have completely different memories of the same event. Like this event happened, and yet they're remembering it in a way that were you even there? You can't have been there. That's not what happened, right? Does anyone have that kind of experience sometimes with people from your past? Yeah. And it's that idea that two people have gone through the same thing, and yet they can't remember it at all in a similar way, where you're left thinking, I guess they must have been there. And so one of the things that we've done is we've developed a little way to talk about this, and it's really powerful in self-leadership. So let's do that now. So I've drawn here on my whiteboard. Can you guys still hear me? Is my microphone still picking me up? Yep. Excellent. So in life, there are events. Right? Stuff happens, 2020 happens, stuff within your churches happen, within your organizations, within your families, within your own life. Events just happen. That's a part of life. They do that, but we're over here. This is me. I'm quite tall and skinny, so I drew a stick figure. And so this is me, and events happen. And what happens is I get to look at those events. Now, there are a lot of different perspectives of this event. There's a million different ones going around. And so if we label this perspective, right? So there is always a perspective of an event. What's interesting, though, is that typically as human beings, the way we talk is we say, what events have shaped your perspective on life? Or what events have shaped who you are? What events have shaped you as a person? That's one of the questions that we ask as people. Now, this is really disingenuous, because what we've discovered is that events happen, but events don't shape us. What actually shapes us is our perspective on events. Because this event, one of the things that we've discovered is what's really powerful is that if we treat all events as neutral until we find a perspective of them that serves us. So events happen, but they don't form our reality. Our perception of the event is what shapes our reality. And so I don't know if you've ever worked with people. So I get to work with people who, some of them had really childhoods that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. But one of the things we work with them, we say, okay, so this stuff happened in your childhood. But I know and this is a really powerful statement. It sounds crazy at first, but just hear me out. It's never too late to have an amazing childhood. Not because you can go back and relive it or any of that kind of stuff. And now, that word amazing is chosen as deliberate, by the way. But now, because I didn't say easy, I didn't say pain-free, I didn't say pleasant, I didn't say happy. What I've said is amazing, because whatever has happened to you in your past, you can find a perspective of that serves who you want to become. And we call this perspective mining at Lead Different. And so I've had people who've gone through, one of my clients, she was an executive out here who grew up in China and was taken away from her parents at the age of 8, had all kinds of horrific stuff that people should be in jail for happened to her all the way through her childhood till she was about 17. Then she ran away and lived on the streets for a while, got into university, ended up educating herself, and now she's an executive in a big company out here in Australia. And I said, okay, so you're going to want to punch me. But what we're going to do is we're going to mine your childhood, find out what you can be grateful for so that you can shape a reality of that where your childhood no longer controls you. See, until you're actually grateful for something, it will control you. And this is the power of understanding that events happen. There's nothing we can do about them. This here, we can change at any time. Hence the saying, it's never too late to have an amazing childhood. And amazing is the correct word to use, because to choose happy or pain-free or easy or pleasant is really a disservice to the walk, to the journey that people have gone on. However, amazing means it may not have been easy, but it's helped create you into this incredible person. So I work with people like that, and we go through this process, and they feel like they don't like me for a while, but eventually they come around. And then in the end, they walk away from this experience going, wow, that's so powerful. And as we continue on, and it's amazing, whether it's executives or these really, like, some of these people are really successful in life, but there's events that still control them because of the perspective they have of that event. And so what serves us as leaders is to ask ourselves this question: what's my perspective going to be on this? And so we move, and people who lead themselves well, they move really quickly from the point where they feel like the event is controlling them to going, no, I can find a perspective of this. And the shorter and shorter you make that time, the better you are at leading yourself. And so you've probably met people who do this naturally, and there's something about them where in the chaos, in the storms, in the craziness, they're really composed and they're really measured. It's because in real time, they're finding a perspective that serves them. And so for my wife and I, one of the things we did when we said, let's not waste this, we were constantly going, okay, this is hard, but what is this going to give us? Oh, this is going to give us a resilience. This is going to help us lift our creativity. I don't know if you know this, but creativity is often at its highest when the budget is its smallest. If you have a team in your church, you want to get more creative, slash their budget. When I was the young adults pastor at a church in America called Saddleback, and it's a huge church with about 60,000 people that go there. One of the fun things was that in the young adults ministry is that we were the most underfunded ministry of the church. We had no money. We had 4,000 people coming along every week, and we had 2 staff people. That was it, to serve them all. And so we had figured out all these systems and ways to get creative with what we did have, which was really fun. And we developed all this stuff that then began to get replicated throughout the rest of the church. And it happened in this little laboratory that had no money. And that was one of the things. So that was for my wife and I, our experience of 2020, when we looked like we were going to go broke, we're like, all right, I guess we get to get creative. How do we feed our kids when we have no money? How do we pay the mortgage when we have no money? How do we, what can we do with this? And it was amazing for enhancing our creativity and our resilience. But I would say the art of self-leadership is being able to differentiate between the event and your perspective of the event, right? You're leading yourself well when you're able to differentiate between those things quickly. And so there's some really interesting research that came out of Canterbury Christchurch University in England, where what they did is they gave the Olympic cycling team doses of caffeine. And they wanted to do this because, see, what we're talking about here is actually a cheat code to life, right? If you do this well, it's amazing how much better life goes for you. It's one of those things where it's not that life is going better for you, but you are making better out of life. And that's what happens. But within this, what they did is they worked with the English cycling team. So I don't know if you know much about cycling, but when you're at the Olympic level, there's so little margin for error and improvement, right? These are the people who've shaved every single hair off their body to try to get that 1 millionth of a second faster around the track. And they're on that knife's edge of performance where their body fat is so low that they're going to get around the track faster, but their body fat goes so low, their immune system is compromised. They're on that knife's edge of performance of where they're going. And so Christchurch University said, we're going to do some tests on caffeine and what its effect is on you. So they said to all the subjects who didn't know how much they were getting, they gave them all three different groups, a placebo group, a low dose, and a high dose. No one knew how much caffeine they were given. And they brought the cyclists out to the velodrome, the cycling tracks. And at the start of every velodrome thing, there's a guy who holds the back of the bike because they have to stand still. And I don't know what those guys are called, but we'll call them bike holders, because I probably should Google it and find out what they're called. But those bike holders were told and instructed to leak to the cyclists how much caffeine they'd been given. And so they might say to, say, Evan's the cyclist and say, Evan, hey, Evan, you were given a high dose, so you're going to absolutely kill it today. Like, you're going to do amazing. Don't tell anyone I told you, but I saw on the list you got the high dose. And so Evan's sitting on his bike going, yeah, all right, I got this. Evan takes off and does his time trial. And then who else have we got on here? And you were given a placebo and you're in trouble today. Everyone's going to everyone's going to cycle faster than you. And then to Marin, they might say, hey, Marin, you've been given a low dose of caffeine, so you should do all right today. What was interesting is that the subjects who were given a moderate dose rode 1.3% faster. The ones who were given a high dose rode 3.1% faster. And those who got a placebo actually rode 1.4% slower. Now, here's what gets really interesting. No one was given any caffeine. Right? How they perceived an event shaped how they performed. If you are able to figure out that 2020 is your unfair advantage for the kingdom of heaven in your little circle of the world, you will perform as if you have an unfair advantage. You will do a better job reaching people, loving people. You will show up as more generous. It's amazing the impact it can have when you just believe that you have an unfair advantage. And utilizing every event that has ever happened to you saying, oh, that's my unfair advantage. The thing that you used to think disqualified you or was your handicap, beginning to develop a relationship with that thing as your unfair advantage is incredible, because it becomes your unfair advantage. And so my wife and I, we used to own a gym. And it was interesting because how people viewed going to the gym shaped their health results. So the people who, we used to do this when people were joining the gym, we had a questionnaire, and one of them was like, how do you tick which box is how you relate to going to the gym? And there were two boxes. One was going to the gym was a punishment for food they'd eaten, right? I've eaten badly, so now I know got to go to the gym. The other option was it's a celebration of what my body can do. The people who viewed going to the gym as a celebration of what their body can do got better results faster. Your perception shapes your reality. So this is why it's so important to begin to mine a perspective of 2020 of what can I be grateful for? What can I be grateful in this? And so one of the ways that we do this is by language. So we're going to talk a little bit about language right now. How many people in here are bilingual? Show of hands. Anyone here bilingual? Yeah. Okay, so can you guys who are bilingual, there's two of you put your hand up. Can you guys unmute yourself? Because I got a few questions for you because I'm really curious. So let me get your names. All Saints Anglican Church, Mitcham. Or Santa. Okay. Are you guys unmuted?
Yes.
There we go. So now I presume your name isn't All Saints Anglican Church Mitcham. What can I call you by?
You can call me Penny.
Penny, wonderful. Penny, what language do you know?
I had to learn Malay in Singapore where I was born, so it was my second language.
Okay, and how old were you when you learned Malay?
Probably from primary school.
Okay, so like 4 or 5 kind of.
Yep,
somewhere around there.
like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. And Santa, how old were you what language do you know?
Well, I was brought up in Malaysia, so I know the Malaysian language, it's Malay.
Yeah, awesome.
A little bit of Cantonese as well, but I've forgotten Cantonese because I'm out of practice.
Yeah, it doesn't take long, does it? And so with that, so we have Malay and English for the both of you, which is pretty funny because two different completely places in Malay. That's great. So did anyone here ever try to learn a language after the age of 12?
Yes.
Yeah. And none of those people put their hand up when I said, are you bilingual? Right? because it's really, I worked with the French School of Perth. I put them through our leadership program, and it was really funny because I used to say the age of 12, and the principal of this school, I was running through this, and at this stage I said, it's really hard to learn a language after the age of 12. She said, no, 10 is the age, in her French accent, and she got really angry because she's French. I hope no one in here is French and going to get offended by that, but she was a principal and French. And she got angry at me for saying 12. I was like, you are wrong. It is 10. And it was, I was like, okay, so we'll go with 10 from here on out. But what's interesting is that this whole thing, your perspective is shaped by the language we used. And I'm going to come back to that bilingual in a second. We're going to talk about some stuff, but language is so powerful in our perspective if you are bilingual, and anyone here ever taken a personality profile or a personality test of any kind? Yep. If you do that in different languages, you will test different in your personality. I was like, what? And I remember reading this thinking, that's crazy. Instead, I thought I'd test this out in an Ignite group. And the first group I did was some executives over at RAC or RACV, we call them RAC over here in WA. And one of the guys in that, he was married to a woman who was half Russian and half Finnish. And so she speaks Russian, Finnish, German, French, and English. She's one of those people. And he immediately says, oh, okay, all right. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, I can agree with this. I was like, what do you mean you agree with this? Because he was a little bit aggressive. I was like, I don't know what's happening here. It was a bit confusing. He said, yeah, so my wife's Russian relatives all say that if I knew her in Russian, because all he could speak was Australian English, which is the poorest version of English, I think. And he said, all I can speak is English. And her Russian relatives say that if I knew her in Russian, I wouldn't be married to her. I said, what? He said, yeah, apparently she's a real B word in Russian. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, that's apparently she's a completely different person in Russian, and that she would still be single if she tried to marry anyone in Russian. I was like, that's fascinating. And so when I shared this French school of the French School of Perth, all the French teachers who were all completely bilingual, they were like, yes, because they'd all done this for different jobs that had done. They said, yes, I am a completely different person in French versus English. So I've got colloquial evidence to back this up as well. But language is so powerful for us that who you are tests differently if you just use a different language. But what's interesting is that not only do we have English that we speak, but we all actually have an internal language, right? The language that goes around in our heads, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we shape our perspective of events happens through that language inside our heads. Changing the language you use inside your head is like a cheat code or a shortcut to doing things easier. And it's this inner voice. See, this inner voice that's happening is what influence comes out of our mouth, right? So what comes out of our mouth only comes from this inner voice that's happening inside our head. But what's interesting about the inner voice inside our head is that it's very rarely saying anything new. In 2005, the National Science Foundation published an article which said that the average person has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. So I don't know where you put yourself in that scale. So you, I imagine, are somewhere between 12 and 60,000 thoughts per day, which is interesting because no matter how many thoughts you have per day, 80% of the thoughts you have are negative. This is what they found on average. Not only that, but 95% of the thoughts you have are exactly the same as today. The 95% of the thoughts that you have today are exactly the same as you had as yesterday. Only 5% of the thoughts you have are different. This is why we keep getting the same results. This is why constantly reaffirming that 2020 was hard, we just want to move on, is going to create a really toxic relationship with 2020, because it's just going to keep going over and over inside our heads. What we need to do in order to change our relationship with 2020 is to develop some new thoughts. Now, those who learned a language when they were young did it by immersion, right? They were young, their brains are pliable, they're learning new things. But after the age of 12, by the way, this language that is constantly going around in your head, you learned by the age of 12. Because just like language that comes out of our mouth, after the age of 12, our home language is set. Our first language is set by the age of 12. It doesn't change after that. So it doesn't matter how many languages you learn, you've still got your base language. And it's the same thing for how we think. That was set by the age of 12. It's only through what Jesus would call the renewing of the mind. This is why Paul says, be transformed through the renewing of your mind. Transformation of who you are, how you show up to things happens when you transform the language that's going inside your head. You want to transform how you relate to 2020, transform the language that's going around inside your head. But it doesn't happen simply, and it doesn't happen without effort, because those of us who've tried to learn a new language after the age of 12 know that it only happens through discipline and repetition. If you stop showing up to your language course, or you stop opening the app that you're using, it goes backwards real fast. Just like if you stop actively shaping your perspective on 2020 through new language, if you take a couple of days off, you're going to go backwards real fast. This is what happens. And so the key to changing about how you relate to 2020 is going to be through learning a new language. And one of the best ways we do this is through what we call empowered versus disempowered language. Right? This is for me. So I got my degree in theology, did all the Greek and the Hebrew, did all that fun stuff. But I learned the most about the Jesus and his language when I viewed it through the lens of how often he used empowered language. Jesus never used disempowered language. It was extraordinary how he was always, so someone bought him, hey, how are we going to feed all these people? I don't know, we only got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Oh, that'll do. Right? Hey, this guy's lame and we can't get to the house. And what he respected was people like, no, we can find a way to do this. We're going to put a hole in the roof. You know what? I respect that hole in the roof. Let's heal this guy. Right? And he didn't, and he always asked people to verbalize in empowered language what they thought he could do. Faith, right? So, hey, what do you want from me? But the guy's blind. It's obvious what he wants. He wants to see. No, Jesus was like, no, I got to hear you say it. Because then I know that you think this can happen and you are ready for it. Because I don't know if you know this, but when you get given a gift that you're not ready for, that gift is going to destroy you. But when we use empowered language saying, Jesus, I know you can heal me. Can you do this now? You are actually ready for whatever he may give to you, whether it's healing or a gift of patience or the gift of whatever it may be that you're actually asking him for. It's the empowered language. So disempowered language typically looks like, so a lot of people come up with the idea of disempowered language and they'll go with, I can't, what is it? Let me, yeah, we got a bit of time. Let's do this. So let's unmute yourselves. What's some disempowered language examples? What are some examples of disempowered language? Unmute is down the bottom. Hey, Sandy, thanks for joining us.
I was thinking about the idea that people say, oh, we don't do it like that around here, or
Yes,
we don't do it like that normally, or we've not done it like that before.
Yeah. Status quo maintenance, we call that.
Yeah.
That's very disempowering. Yeah. What else do we got?
Too hard.
Too hard, exactly, disempowering. And what do we got?
We must have an 8 o'clock service.
What's that, sorry?
We must have an 8 o'clock service.
Must have, yeah. So Anne's actually tapped into a really subtly disempowering language. Do you know the words need, have to, and should are incredibly disempowering? And that's what Anne's tapping into there. Like, oh, we need to do this. We have to have this. I want to tell you a quick story. We do have limited time, so I'm going to give you an example. When I started my company, I decided to start my own company the same year that my wife and I had our first child. And so that's a great time to start the company because my wife is staying home with the child and I'm starting a company. We had no money. But one of the things we decided is that we still didn't want to put our kid in childcare just because it didn't feel right to us. We don't care what anyone else does. Just for us, it didn't feel right. So there's no judgment anyone does, but we chose not to. And so one of us would stay home and the other one would go to work. So when she had days relief teaching, I would stay home, look after our son. When she when she didn't have relief teaching, I would work on the new company. And I remember the first time I did this Ignite Self-Leadership program, the first group I ran it through, I got through to, I was at week 6, and someone wanted to catch up with me one-on-one outside of the group. And so Josh called me up and he said, hey, I want to catch up with you this week to talk about some, I'm working through some stuff and I'd love your input. I said, great, let's do it. He said, can we do Wednesday? I said, I can't do it on Wednesday. I have to look after my boy that day. Actually, I had 2 kids by then, maybe. I don't know. I had to look after, it was a while ago. I have to look after at least one child that day. And Josh replied, interesting, do you want to have another go at that? I said, why? He said, because you just used 2 disempowering terms. I said, I'm supposed to be doing this. And I said, all right, I don't want to catch up with you on Wednesday because I get to look after my boy that day. It was interesting. As soon as that phrase came out of my mouth, I get to look after Mike and my eldest son that day, it actually instantly changed how I related to that task, whatever it was, even though it's not that I didn't like that task, but instantly changed how I engaged with that. And so then I went to my wife and I said, hey, baby, so I've been saying that when you work that I have to look after the kids. Forgive me for that, because that's not how I want to relate to that. To this. From here on out, I'm going to use, I get to look after the boys, whatever. And she said, okay, that sounds great. And I said, why are you tearing up though? And she goes, because it's changed how I relate to you look after them as well. Just hearing you say, I get to do that. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And so what was interesting is that not only did it change how I interacted with my boys, but now all of a sudden, a couple of months later, when I've started saying I get to look after the boys when she works, my wife's feedback as a relief teacher has improved, where they're rating her higher as a teacher, because she's showing up to work not thinking, oh, I've left my husband who had to, and now he has to look after the boys, but my husband gets to look after the boys. So that changed how she showed up as a teacher. So now not only am I having a better time looking after my boys are having a better time when I'm saying I get to look after you guys today, because they're showing up going, yeah, this is awesome. Daddy's like saying he gets to look after us. But my wife is showing up to teaching a better teacher. So now there's probably about 150 kids per day who have a better phys ed teacher because my wife is showing up as a better teacher. One person changed their language from have to get to. And all these people had a different experience. What happens when you change your language about how you relate to 2020? We got to go through 2020. We had the privilege of going through and walking through 2020 together. How many people's perspective are you going to be able to change and influence and how they relate to 2020 because of just that simple, tiny change of language? And because it'll change not only how you experience it, but how other people experience it, because they've got an example of someone who's experienced it differently. And so that's one of the challenges for you, is to mind the perspective to the place where you're grateful. Now, grateful is one of those weird things. So anytime people have gone through something hard, and I don't know what 2020 was like for you, I'd love to sit down with you and hear your experience of it and to personally mine it with you. But I'm going to give you a little cheat code, and we'll shortcut the process because we don't have a lot of time here. The goal of gratitude of something hard isn't so that you ignore the pain. It's not so that you don't feel the pain. So there's a phrase that we came up with to aim for in how we think about something that was hard. And here's the phrase: wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So grateful I got to go through it. Right? Where we acknowledge, man, that was hard. But I've actually spent sufficient time mining this for the perspective of it. And there's things I'm grateful for that I know I couldn't have gotten in any other way. And that phrase is kind of our target. And so whenever I'm working with people and we're doing perspective mining, that's always the target, where they get to the end and they can say that phrase, wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I'm so grateful I got to go through it. And that's a really interesting way to begin to think about 2020, where how do you get to the point where you say, Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So grateful I had the privilege of going through that, or a privilege of leading my congregation, of leading my team, of leading my organization, whatever it is that you're doing in your corner of the world. And so it's not necessarily even these new strategies or these new things that we're going to do. That one of the biggest impacts that you can do to change your relationship 2020 just simply occurs through changing your language. I got to go through 2020. It was such a privilege that God put me here for this time and place here. Yeah. So Evan, you've just put, that's what Jesus, explain that to us. Because we've talked about this before, but I like you.
Yeah, it just reminded me, Jesus went to the cross, which is like the worst, most unimaginable suffering you could imagine. But he did that because of, he did that for us, and he didn't, go down a different path to try and ease the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's that idea of so grateful that I got to go through it, wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So that's the goal of this kind of conversation that we're having here. And so how much time we got left? We got 12 minutes left. Okay, let me give you a second. I want to share with you something which dramatically changed how I relate to stress and stressful things. So let's do this. Can you guys read that? It says stressor, right? That says stressor. Who feels like 2020 had a lot of stressors? Right? The isolation, the financial uncertainty, the being in who you're in isolation with, maybe, whatever it may be. But 2020 had a lot of stressors that were brand new for us. Stuff that we hadn't actually had the skills to deal with in the past because we've never faced them in the past. And so typically when a stressor comes in, we just have this default idea that stressors lead to distress, right? Stressors lead to distress. And we know what distress is, right? Anxiety, pain, sorrow, our overwhelming frustration, make it go away. So most people are relating to 2020 through the lens of distress, where they just want to make it go away. Hence that idea that we talked about at the beginning. What's interesting is that distress isn't the only response to stressors. There's another response. The other response is the powerful one. It's this, eustress. Eustress, as in EU, which is Latin for good. Eustress is another response to stress. How many people here remember at university maybe leaving an assignment to the last minute? And so there's distress and eustress and stressors for people who seem to be trying to look closely. But how many people remember university, you've left an assignment at the last minute and it's due the next day and you got to write 3,000 words, you got to do it all night. So you pull an all-nighter, you stay up all night, you're smashing the coffee back, you get it done, you type it up, you handwrite it out, whatever it is, but you get it done and you walk into class the next day, you put this assignment down at the university on the lecturer's desk and you walk out going, heck yeah! And it feels amazing. And you're like, I can't believe I got that done. And it's one of those things, it doesn't make any sense, right? Can anyone remember that where you pulled all nighters? Yeah, okay. I'm not the only one. I was like, don't tell me I was the only bad student. There had to be more than one bad student on this call. And so that right there is an example of eustress, right? A stressor came in, but what it produced was a response of energy, momentum, meaning. All this response comes out of it. And so eustress is the opposite of distress. It's where you choose to be empowered by stress in your life. But what's interesting is that eustress doesn't depend on what kind of stress comes from the stressor. Yeah, there we go. I'm moving in reverse on my screen. Eustress doesn't respond or have anything to do with what kind of stressor it is. Eustress is a positive response that one has to a stressor. It has nothing to do with the stress. It's all about what perspective you find of the stressor. So you get to control whether you experience eustress or distress. But what can we do to conjure up eustress from stressors? And there's a couple of ways that we can do this. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. There's 3 things we should be aiming for. And so I literally do this with a sheet. Like, so if something feels big or overwhelming in front of me, what I do is I sit down with a sheet of paper and a pen, and I write down 3 words and then dot points underneath. I write down meaning, and then I leave room to fill in some meaning. Hope, and then I leave room to write some stuff underneath that. And energy. And I look at, and I sit down and I go, okay, what is actually creating this distress or stress? What is actually doing this? What is it that I'm facing? And it might be that, I've lost, so like I said, in that first 48 hours, I've lost every single contract. Okay. All right. What is meaning? What is some meaning I can take from this? What is something meaningful I can do in this situation? What is something that I can create hope for the future in this? And how can I be energized by this? And I begin to mine that event, looking to create a eustress experience for myself. And so now people who are in my circles and people who've done Ignite groups and stuff like that. And so Evan, whenever we're chatting, sometimes he'll be chatting about something stressful, and I'll begin to steer the conversation and go, okay, but how can you find meaning, hope, or energy out of this? And the point of going, how can you create a eustressful experience for yourself? And so and this is from the Journal of Managerial Psychology, which is everyone's favorite magazine, right? It's probably one of the few useful things I got from it, where it's this idea that eustress is a positive response one has to a stressor. Indicators of eustress include responding to a stressor with a sense of meaning, hope, or energy. And so beginning to hack this with using the way that we use language to create a perspective of our stressors. And so we're able to build a relationship with 2020 where we're grateful because we can see the meaning, hope, and energy it's brought into our lives. And so we can respond to 20, we're going to go, yes, and we can respond to anything that's happened in our life and go, yes, that was hard, but here's what I got from it. Meaning, hope, and energy. It was something that brought meaning, hope, and energy out of this. And here is why, even though it was hard, I'm so grateful I got to go through it. But I want to finish off by talking about a guy called Nassim Taleb. Anyone here ever heard of Nassim Taleb? He's a Lebanese economist. You guys don't keep up to date with your Lebanese economists? Gosh, what's happening here? No, he's a fascinating guy, and he wrote this economic theory called anti-fragile. And I remember reading this economic theory about how black swan events or stuff that's unprecedented could actually be, because the way he talks about it, he created this idea of anti-fragile. So there's stuff that's fragile, right? So if I have a glass and I hold it above concrete and I drop it, what happens to that glass? Shatters, right? Because it's fragile. Now, if that glass is resilient and I drop it on the concrete, what happens? It doesn't break. It survives the fall. Maybe it's just got a tiny little chip or something like that, but it survives the fall. If something is anti-fragile and you drop it, what happens? This is where it gets interesting. Not only does it not break, but it either divides into 2 and now you have 2 glasses, or the glass grows stronger. Glass isn't anti-fragile. You and I are anti-fragile. Physically, we're anti-fragile. If you break a bone, where is that bone now the strongest? Where the bone heals, where the break happened. If you go to the gym and you want to grow your muscles, you have to tear them. And where you tear them, they grow back bigger and stronger. We are also, as people, mentally anti-fragile. Where the things that are meant to break us, And so when I work with organizations, and so when I'm working with like Woodside or Telstra or Toyota or whatever, and I'm working with their executives, what we talk about is building in an anti-fragile mentality in their staff, where resilience is overrated, because resilience just means you survive stuff. Being anti-fragile means that it is the creation of the awesome that it brings into your life, right? So it brings amazing things into your life because you got to go through that. So when you're saying, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, I'm so grateful I got to go through it, it's because you've experienced the anti-fragile nature of how God has created you. And so anti-fragility actually is a part of why we can relate to these things in a different way. And so who we are, our psyche, our mental things, we are actually anti-fragile with the right training, with the right language, with the right work. Now, does this mean that I'm not saying that mental health issues aren't real and you can just talk them away? I'm not saying that. I've lost basically a brother to suicide because he's struggled with mental health stuff. That was very real, and there was no just thinking positively about it or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. So don't hear me that I'm just some pie in the sky. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that for most of us who don't have chemical imbalances and all those kinds of things that are going on, there is stuff that we can do to help fight this idea that we're fragile or that we need to be resilient, and that there's something beyond resilience where we can relate to ourselves as anti-fragile. But what I've discovered in all this self-leadership stuff, in building a relationship with 2020, if you aren't leading yourself well, you can't have a healthy relationship with 2020. If your own life is defined by chaos and inertia, you will not have a healthy relationship with 2020. And so with understanding, one of the reasons that I talk about this, and look, the reality is that I would love to work with you guys. We do some leadership development programs. We do the Ignite program, and then we've got this other Ignite online program. I've priced them to be super affordable for you guys, where when I work with, the oil and gas companies, they pay ludicrous amounts, but when you're in a not-for-profit, you pay a lot less. And so if you guys are interested in doing any work with us, Evan's going to send you out an email where he just outlines a bit of what we do and what we offer. And he can do that. And I like it that he's going to do that because he's gone through it and experienced some of the benefits from it. And he's actually a happy customer. And we actually become friends. We're more friends now. You're not a customer. And this happens a lot because the people like Evan who go through, who I really respect what they're doing, I'm like, I need them in my life. And so I'm like, I guess I can't charge them to work with them now because now we're just hanging out and talking. But it's that idea where I love what you guys are doing. I love what the church is doing. I love the way that you guys, where I feel like a lot of you have been in states that are in lockdown. The way you guys have kept going forward and figured out new ways, especially with people like Evan's help with that digital, how we do things. But hopefully this session, and it's 10 o'clock now, so I'm kind of tying it up before I wanted to, but whatever. Hopefully this session's been helpful for some tools of how to begin to develop a new relationship with 2020. So any questions or thoughts before we go? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. No, we got no questions. Is that a Oh, Mark's no. This is hang on. Mark. You got a question.
So I'm really blown away by this idea of reframing. Things. Just again, I don't know everyone's situation, but one of the things that I hear often, particularly Anglican clergy in Melbourne, talking about is that we run a small church and we don't have the resources. How could we reframe or mind perspective so that we don't think of ourselves as small church, but actually we're the church?
Yeah. So I don't even think you need to change the terminology.
Right.
The terminology doesn't change, the reframing of it does. So how does being part of a small church, how is that your superpower?
Yeah.
Right? And you begin to write down all the advantages you have because you're in a small church. And trust me, there are many. And how do you begin to leverage that? And so being a small church, because what happens is being a small church ends up becoming what we call a racket, where it's serving a purpose, to allow you to disempower yourself. Oh, we can't do that because we're a small church. Instead of saying, what can we do because we're a small church that other large churches can't do? And there are so many things. Like I said, I've been on staff at a church of 60,000 people, and I've been on staff of a church plant. I'm telling you, if I was offered a position at a church of a mega church of 60,000 people, or starting out at a church plant, I'm choosing the church plant every single time. Every single time, because of what you can do in that situation, the freedom you have. I remember when I was on staff with Erwin McManus over at Mosaic, and then came out and he said, I want you to plant a Mosaic in Australia. I said, great. And he said, so you're going to do that in Sydney? I said, no, I'm not going to do that in Sydney. He said, so you're going to do that in Melbourne? I said, no, I'm not going to do that in Melbourne. I said, where are you going to do it? I'm going to do it in Perth. He said, you suck. But what was interesting was that I remember he came out 2 years into our plant and he said, I'm so jealous of you. He's like, and I was like, why? Because at that point I was pretty discouraged about, how hard it was to plant a church. And he goes, because no one knows who you are. And if you screw up and get things wrong, no one's going to care. He said, if I get things wrong at Mosaic, it's headlines in the papers. If we try something and it doesn't work and we lose a bunch of money, everyone knows about it. And so there's a level of thing. And so that was when I began to mine and go, okay, what advantages actually come from being part of something small and out of the way, and where people don't actually care about your successes or your failures, where you, instead of complaining about, oh, no one cares if we fail or succeed, that's your superpower. Right? And so the perspective mining starts at, what if we saw this as our superpower? So my client, who was the executive from an oil and gas company who grew up in China, who I said, what if your superpower was your childhood? What if we began to relate to that as your superpower? And that was how we began that perspective mining. And you just go from there. Have I just lost everyone? I can only see you and me, Mark, now. Oh, that was interesting. Something weird happened on my end. I was like, everyone's gone. Good. All right, cool. We'll keep going. But does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, that's good. And I think well, I think it's that idea of being at superpower, because you also have to be a bearer of good news to people. Yeah. And sometimes when you get together with other people in ministry, it can be like, oh, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working. It can be a downward news fest, but actually it's challenging to go to a deanery meeting or a meeting of ministers and say, this is working, this is working, this is working.
Yeah.
But I've had to change the perspective in saying, I'm not being idealistic. It's just actually I'm being a bearer of good news to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another question that is worth asking is, so I have this belief. So I have several beliefs, whether they're true or not, I believe them to be true because of the results they produce in my life. One of them is I believe that Jesus loves me and died for me. Whether it's true or not, I don't care to prove it's true, but I know is who I show up and how I am as a person is way better when I believe it to be true, right? I can't prove that he did it. Like I can come up with, like, I guess stuff that kind of does, but I can't actually definitively prove it. So another belief that I have is stuff only works because I don't want it. When stuff isn't working, it's because I don't want it to work. Right? Which is a really weird way to begin to think about it. Okay, why would I not want that to work? Well, it gets me off the hook. Because if I can just show up and say, oh, this isn't working. Oh, yeah, that's really hard. Yeah, we haven't figured out a way to make that work yet. Oh, yeah, okay. Like I fit in. Because like you said, as soon as you show up with a different narrative. By the way, did you know how as a species we're called Homo sapiens? You know what the word sapien means? Knowing. We are not Homo sapiens. We are Homo neurans. Neurans mean the story that we tell. You know that event versus perspective? That's what we're talking about, event perspective. Yeah. Whatever story we tell stories to make sense of what's happening around us.
Yeah.
And so when you start changing the narrative, people look at you like you're crazy. And most of us are more committed to having people look at us like we're normal than to actually get stuff to work.
Yeah.
there's a high level of commitment that we have. And so because it's weird when you show up with this kind of stuff. You're like, hey, this is what's working, and I'm really excited about the development here. You're like, huh, what? Oh, you're looking at it through rose-colored glasses. Yeah.
Well,
Correct.
I had the realization when I looked at, because in the Anglican Church we submit our annual reports in November, and the annual report for 2020 was 25 pages.
Yeah.
The annual report in my church for 2019 was 25 pages.
Yeah.
So we did as much ministry that we reported on as last year, and yet people had the self-narrative of we didn't do much this year.
But
But
we couldn't do much. And when we couldn't do much is even more disempowering.
Yeah. So that was a perspective shift for me, to see the annual report is as full. We did stuff. The prayer ministry broke through. The miracles happened. Jesus was still sitting on the throne.
Yeah.
And, you know, so yeah.
There's a church that I work with over here, multi-campus, quite a large one, and they were looking at 2020 going, we're screwed, because they've taken some big leaps of faith financially with stuff that they're doing. And what was interesting is that their giving went up.
Yeah, well.
But they went super creative, and they were doing all kinds of really fun stuff online for a while, because they were still too big to meet in person, for even though the lockdown ended over here. They were still too big to meet in person for most of 2020. And so they just did stuff online. And what's interesting is that they've reshaped how they're going to do church in the future. That's a much more efficient way of reaching people and a way better use of resources. And by resources, I mean people's time, people's energy, and their money. It's a way more effective use for it. And if you mine and you look at what you did in 2020, you'll find the same thing. You'll find gifts there. You're like, actually, we don't need to do this and this anymore. We can do it this way, which means that we've saved these kind of resources. But and you rejigs, and there's a whole bunch of flow and effect from that. But there's still, like you're saying, where you're looking at like, we can do all that whilst not meeting together. Are you kidding me? What can we do now? And reshaping, and where you're like, okay, we've figured out what we can do even with one hand tied behind our back. All right, what happens now we get our other hand back? Right? And that's a challenge that you throw down to your people and be like, hey, look what we did with one hand. Are you kidding me? Today, actually this morning, my son showed me this thing. It's a girl who streams a computer game. You guys have heard of streamers, right? People, what they do is they're generally kids in their late teens, early 20s who play computer games, and people watch them play computer games. It makes no sense to me, but the kids are into it. And so this girl has only got one arm. Now, to play computer games, you need to use a mouse and a keyboard. And she is good at this game using a mouse that's underneath her forearm. So she puts the mouse there, and she uses her hand on the keyboard because she's only got one arm. And she's mapped it in such a way, I don't know how she does it, but I'm watching it going, that makes no sense. But she's figured out a way to do what most of us said, no, you need two hands for that. She lost an arm and she was like, want to bet? Right? That's what the church has gone through this year. Oh, we need two arms for this. Want to bet? And your 25-page report is evidence of that. And that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's really cool. I like that.